You can tell where I've been in recent weeks, can't you? It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome His Excellency Prime Minister Masrour Barzani to the stage. Would you... Thank you, Prime Minister. It's a pleasure to have you here and to spend this hour with you, and I'm looking very much forward to turning this into a robust conversation about your time as leader, your time as Chancellor of the Security Council in the KRG, and also to speak more broadly beyond the very real, very significant issues which you are stewarding here in the Kurdish region, but also a chance to have a look beyond the borders of the KRG and Iraq and into the region itself. Now, you've been Prime Minister for just 2.5 years now, since July 2019. For 7 years, roughly prior to that, Chancellor of the Security Council, where you spearheaded the global fight against the Islamic State terrorist group. And I think it's important to acknowledge up front that the efforts that you and the Kurdish people and the Iraqi people made to fight the Islamic State did the world a great service, and that the world does owe a debt to the KRG and to Iraq for helping get rid of the scourge of the Islamic State. So thank you for that up front. Now, as I said, I want this to be a robust conversation in which we talk about various arms of what you've achieved in your role so far. But let me take the start of this conversation further afield, to the forests of Belarus and Poland, where thousands of young Kurds are freezing in a forest in a faraway land. How did that come to happen, and what is being done to get them back?
Well, thank you, Martin, for this opportunity. You're talking about an issue that is very important, and we are all very concerned. I'm personally very concerned about, first of all, the health and the well-being of these people who are stranded on the border between Belarus and Poland. Apparently, there are many people from different countries, some including from Kurdistan region. Unfortunately, it looks like that these people have been exploited by a number of group of, let's say, travel agents, human traffickers, some of the political merchants, if I may say that, and of course, some people from outside in Belarus as well. These people did not leave this area under any sort of pressure, and they were not legally pursued, or they didn't have any restriction on their travel. So most of these people traveled freely on their own will through airlines and official channels. After they went to Belarus, spending some time in hotels, and then they were directed to the border to cross into EU. Unfortunately, the situation, the cold weather, and what we've seen, some of the footages on TVs and videos that we've seen, is very concerning, because some of them have children. And these children are innocent people who are unfortunately paying the price for what looks like to be a political game. We are reaching out to all of our friends abroad, and also here we are dealing with Baghdad, to find a way for all of those who are willing to come back so that they can return. And until then, we are asking our partners in Europe to allow Red Cross to provide immediate aid to these people who are in much need. Now, whether or not these people can go into EU or not, I mean, that's something that obviously we will know as we follow the events there. But what's important for us to say is that unfortunately there has been a lot of misinformation about why they're there and why they went to that area. Like I said, most of them went on their free will. And if you look at Kurdistan, relatively speaking, to the rest of the region, is a very secure place. We are hosting about almost 1 million IDPs who are fleeing different parts of Iraq and the neighboring countries and coming to Kurdistan because they feel safe and secure here. So it doesn't make any sense to say that people are leaving here because of a security situation.
But what they would say is that they're leaving in search of opportunity that isn't being provided for them.
Let me get back to that point. And then some may say, okay, well, it's because of the economic situation. That may be true, but the bad economy is not the fault of the KRG. As you know, that over the years, we've had our own issues with the federal government. Since 2020 and 2021, 12 months of the budget of the KRG has not been paid by the Iraqi government. COVID hit us very hard at the very beginning of this cabinet. And of course, the oil prices dropped. No budget, no trade, bad economy, but we still managed to survive. By the reforms that we started in the KRG, yes, we couldn't pay full salaries every month, but we did pay salaries every month. And there are job opportunities, in fact. Since the beginning of this cabinet until now, we have created about 112,000 jobs by reactivating some of the projects, some by private sector, some by public partnership, and some sponsored by the government itself. In fact, there are opportunities for other people to work. If you look, people have come all the way from Asia, from Bangladesh, from the Philippines. People have come from Lebanon, from Africa. They are coming here to work, from Turkey, from Iran, from other parts of Iraq. So why can they find jobs here, but some people cannot find the job? It's really, it depends on the nature of the jobs that these people want to have. So many of them who want to go to Europe are in search of a different opportunity. It's not the flee of desperation. They're going there, and I hope that the truth is told and the world knows that these people went there like every other immigrant that wants to travel and go and in search of different opportunities in different parts of the world. But if they want to return, they can always return here. And in fact, many of these people who have gone, they have spent thousands of dollars to travel agents and to some individuals. So if they could come up with thousands of dollars to pay for the trip, I'm sure if they wanted to work together, they could have created their own jobs here. As we've seen in many parts of Kurdistan, I've seen entrepreneurs in Suleymaniye, in Duhok, in Erbil, that have started their own small jobs, and the government has also been supportive to do that.
Will you help those who want to get back in terms of repatriation flights, organizing logistics?
We are working with the federal government. In fact, there has been efforts on the way to return those who want to come back.
Okay. Now, you spoke about the lack of jobs available at the moment, potentially for some people who are looking for jobs in their domain. We're sitting in a learning institution now, which is obviously very special to you, and it is an institution in the KRG which is looking to create highly skilled graduates who fit in and add value to the Kurdish workforce. As part of that, the reform program that you have pioneered in your time as Prime Minister has been comprehensive. We're talking diversification, empowerments of institutions, efficiency drives, even I hear privatisation of some aspects of state infrastructure, the distribution sector of the electricity industry, for example. Also, You push very hard against corruption, which has remained a potent menace, not just here, but in other parts of Iraq and around the Middle East. All of these things that you've done, how have they started to cut through in your mind to people who are saying to me and saying to others that they're fleeing because there's nothing for them here? And can you convince them that within a generation, or even shorter than that, this will be a land of opportunity, and that the world's best practiced reforms and initiatives that you're putting in place will cut through?
Well, let me just clarify something. I'm not saying that here the situation and conditions are perfect. We still have problems. We still have economic problems. We still have security issues, and the challenges that we face collectively in this region doesn't exclude us. So we are a part of the overall region that are facing all these challenges altogether. But what we have done in the KRG in terms of reform has helped us survive in these very tough times. I just explained at the beginning how difficult the economic situation for Kurdistan was. And if it were not because of the reform, probably we would have collapsed. But that doesn't mean that we are where we want to be. We just made sure that we put everything back on the right track, and we are looking forward to have a better economy with the creation of new jobs, with creation of new opportunities, with solving some of the outstanding issues with Baghdad, which we hope that we can achieve that. We hope that this will be a new opportunity for everybody here to work. I do believe that Kurdistan has a significant potential to be a much better place, a much safer place in terms of economic prosperity, in terms of security, and in terms of political stability. For that, we need to work much closer together. In fact, many of the things that you mentioned about economy or about security may not be the problem per se, but the major problem that we are facing is political. And both economy and security are used as tools to increase political pressure on the KRG, both internal and externally. So in order to overcome these problems, we have to find a way how we can bring about a better political stability to the region. That will, in turn, help improve the economic conditions for these people. There have been opportunities for people that have been very successful here. The government is doing everything in its capacity to work towards a better life and living conditions for its citizens and population. But let's also not forget that we are hosting about 1 million IDPs, and the cost of that is on the shoulders of the KRG without any support from the federal government. The federal government, in fact, has the sovereign expenditures, some of which should be spent on these camps and these refugees and IDPs that are in Kurdistan, but that's not the case. So except for some NGOs, most of the responsibilities of taking care of these IDPs and refugees is the responsibility of the KRG. In order to help them return, the living conditions and the security of these people in their homes must improve, so that with their return, there will be a huge burden lifted from the shoulders of the KRG.
You speak about the political impediments to get you out of what you aptly describe as this perfect storm of conditions which have brought the Kurdish economy to its knees over the last 18 months in particular. But central to the difficulties here are the ongoing issues you have with Baghdad vis-a-vis the budget allocation, which should be coming your way according to an understanding which was struck by Iyad Allawi, the former Prime Minister, many years ago, 17 years ago now. At the time, that was 17.5% of the Iraqi budget. It was never really got there, but in certain months and certain years, it got within range. Where are we now with the budget allocation, given that earlier this year you put out a statement praising Prime Minister Mustafa Kadhimi for a deal which had been struck to get that back in motion?
Yes, well, we've been talking about this many times, and I've personally talked about this on many occasions. KRG never received 17% of the Iraqi budget. Even at the time where it was told that KRG received 17%, it was never the case. Then, if you look at the sequence of events, that 17% based on a personal decision of a prime minister, was reduced to 13.6%. And even that was never the case. So KRG never received 13% of the Iraqi budget. And the reason for that, first of all, there is, most of Iraq's revenue is from the oil sale. About almost 1 million barrels of oil is used for local consumption and doesn't add up to the overall Iraqi budget. And that's about roughly 22% of the Iraqi budget. So forget that. The rest that is being exported and turned into revenue, about 48% of that was allocated for sovereign expenditures. And that was supposed to come, for instance, Peshmergas that are supposed to be a part of the overall Iraqi security apparatus, to pensions. And there are many areas that the KRG is eligible to receive the sovereign expenditures, but none of the sovereign expenditures actually ended up in Kurdistan. So we are talking about 52% of the 80% of the Iraqi overall budget, and KRG received 13% of that. If you calculate that, it will really be somewhere around less than 5%. So KRG has really been receiving about less than 5% of the Iraqi budget. And then, of course, there is the question of the 2021 budget. There is a law. There is a law that, according to that law, a certain amount is put aside to be paid to the KRG. We had a deal with the federal government. They have calculated all the revenues of the KRG, including the oil sale and the internal revenues. Adding that up, you come up with a number. And then there is the Kurdish share of the Iraqi budget. There is a difference.
Yes.
That difference needs to be paid by the federal government to the KRG. So when some say and accuse the KRG that KRG is not actually fulfilling its obligation, it's not true. Because we have already accepted to subtract whatever revenues we collect in Kurdistan from the overall budget, and the remaining part be paid to the KRG. And even that was not paid. They came up with just a number as 200 billion dinars, which is equivalent to $137 million, that was supposed to be paid to the KRG. That's in 2021. But in 2020, this wasn't the case, because back then they were paying $320 million to the KRG. 6 months of 2020 was never paid to the KRG. And even according to the Iraqi budget of 2021, 6 months have not been paid. So a total of 12 months of this budget was never paid to the KRG, which if you add all the numbers, it's about $3.1 billion. So with that, we are still facing some economic issues and some economic problems.
And part of solving that is doing the best that you can to put the KRG on a sovereign economic footing, and therefore the efficiency drives and reforms are central to that. But in order for that to happen, building a strong, viable private sector is obviously essential, but there's risk. And one of the things that we've heard quite consistently at this conference in the last couple of days by several speakers is that perhaps the culture in the KRG is not entirely prepared for risk. And also, how do you build a new constituency that will inevitably ask for a much stronger say in how things are run?
Well, first of all, individuals have responsibilities as much as the government does. It's a shared responsibility to run the government. The government is there to serve people, and people are there to play their part. Now, in terms of the reform that we have made and the jobs that we've created and everything that I just talked about, I don't want to repeat myself, have helped to improve the conditions and actually help us survive until this moment. One of the factors that was very helpful, you mentioned, is the private sector. When we were in very desperate need of doing some projects so that the economy could get going, was for me to invite all of the private sector businessmen to come, and we sat together. I told them, and I expected them to play their part and do their projects. That helped run the economy at a very critical time. So it really brought many people back to jobs, if you will. Now, in terms of people to have a say, of course, people are the ultimate decision makers of any country. They either decide on who to become the government and to rule in elections, and they can basically influence decisions of the policymakers. But they have a responsibility to play, and the biggest responsibility for them is to love their country, to protect their country, and to work to improve their country. The government alone cannot do that. If I just give you an example, that this government is only almost about more than 85% of its budget, it's going to the salaries. It's going to the salaries of people who are on the government payroll. And these are about 1,200,000 people, 200,000 people, 1,200,000 people. But the population of Kurdistan is more than 6 million. So we still have roughly about 5 million people who are not on any payroll. What does that mean? Is government responsible for the lives and the living conditions of those, or only the ones that are taking the salary? So that's a very important question to ask. The government is responsible to provide for the health system, education, basic services, electricity, water, and you name it, for all of its citizens, whether it's a government employee or on a government payroll or not. And when I'm saying that we have about 1,200,000 people who take salaries, they're not all employees, but they're including pensions. In Baghdad, they have made a separation. Only those that are directly working for the government are considered to be employees. But the other ones are taking their pension and salaries from the sovereign expenditures. That never came to Kurdistan. So the number we are giving is the collective number of everybody that actually is paid by the government. So in that case, we must feel responsible that how we can improve the overall economic conditions of Kurdistan. We cannot do that with the very little percentage left for the services to all. So Kurdistan cannot continue or expect to improve if it only pays whatever revenues it has to the salaries. That's one problem that we have faced. The other problem is the collective debts that accumulated over the years on the KRG for a number of reasons. 4 years of fight against ISIS from 2014 until 2017, not a single dollar was paid to the KRG from Baghdad. So KRG had to borrow money from the oil traders to be able to run its affairs. Those are now debts that we inherited. We need to pay them back. So when you look at the overall revenues, these revenues are not enough to pay the debts, to pay the salaries, and yet to also improve the economy of this region. For that reason, we started a reform to cut the expenditures of the government and to collect the revenues so that we could put in a better use, to build an infrastructure that could help Kurdistan to be economically self-sufficient. So we are diversifying the economy to look at other sources of revenues. We are looking at improving agriculture and building industries and looking at tourism to be additional revenue avenues for the KRG.
I want to zoom out a little now and move on to the broader neighbourhood. And let's start with Syria, which is the disintegration of which over the last 10 years you've had a front row seat to quite a unique vantage point. We're at a point in the Syrian civil war, or we can almost call it the post-war period. And what now for Syria? It may well be the definition of a Pyrrhic victory, but is it time to acknowledge that Bashar al-Assad has won and just to move on?
Well, he survived. I don't know if it would be the right terminology to use, to call him a loser or a winner, but he survived. He survived against all the odds, and this is a near reality in Syria. Now, the question is, what should be the future of Syria? Of course, as neighbors of Syria, we want to have peace, we want to have stability, because one way or another it's going to affect the situation in Iraq as well. We are concerned about the Kurdish population in northern Syria as well, and we are trying everything we possibly can to reduce tensions and to make sure that there will be a comprehensive solution for all of Syria, not just that part. But as you know, there are many actors and players. It's not just the Syrians, but there are Syrians, regional powers, foreign powers. There are many, including the United States, Russia, Turkey, Iran. All of them are in Syria. So to have a sustainable solution in Syria, these countries should also come to some sort of agreement but what we wish is that it will not be on the expense of the rights of any community in Syria. We want to see peace restored in Syria and the stability is back for the region.
The 200,000 or so Syrian Kurds who came to the KRG during the last Turkish incursion into the northeast in October 2019, have they mostly stayed or have they returned?
They are mostly here. They haven't returned. Some very few of them have returned. But the reason why they are not returning is not because of ISIS. They may have fled because of ISIS, but the reason why they are not returning is not because of ISIS. It's because of the current system in place that are affiliated with PKK and because of the oppressive policies of the system in place and because of the uncertainty about the future of this country. A lot of these people are very skeptical about what could happen next. They don't know if the United States is going to stay there or not. They don't know if this part of Syria is going to be sandwiched between the pressure from the south and the pressure from the north. So they just don't know what they should go back to. And that's one of the main reasons why they're not returning until now.
If the opportunity presented itself, would you join the rapprochement with Damascus and travel to see Bashar al-Assad or invite him to Erbil?
Well, we always prefer peaceful dialogue with all of the regional powers and countries. We've never had any personal problem with any of the leaders in the region. So if the opportunity to promote peace and stability, we would always endorse those opportunities.
Turning to the east now, to Iran, later this month we have a crucial round of talks on the JCPOA. It's clear in recent weeks that the American rhetoric is starting to become a little bit unsettled. They're not sure if this deal is going to materialize at all. What are the stakes here? What happens if this deal falls over? What are the stakes for the region and beyond?
Well, that's an important question because the JCPOA is between Iran, Europe, and the United States, mainly the Western powers versus Iran. But when it comes to the regional countries, the situation goes beyond JCPOA. We are talking about the stability of the region that doesn't only focus on a nuclear deal with Iran. Iran is an important player in the region. And of course, having any sort of peaceful solution that would promote peace and the rules of engagement can be limited to non-interfering in the neighboring countries, of course, that would be the ideal solution for the region, because this region is not suffering from a nuclear, let's say, proliferation or competition. In fact, it is suffering from the interferences and the competition on the ground in each other's affairs. So in order for the region to feel safer, the region, in my view, and from the talks that we've had with many of the regional leaders, is that we need to have a better system and better relations on the basis of mutual respect and non-interference.
And what does happen if this deal falls over? Where do we go from there?
Well, I don't want to, make any comments based on assumptions. Let's hope that it will not fall apart, and hope that there will be some sort of an understanding that will help the region and the stability of the area.
Looking elsewhere in the Middle East, you're committed to outreach to Arab states, to the Gulf monarchies and beyond. you're obviously starting from a handicap in that you are dealt with as a subnational actor, not as a sovereign state at this point. But have you had any success in recent times in looking for trade routes, looking for investment, looking for political connections outside of Iraq?
Yes, definitely. Of course, I mean, we are interested in improving our situation in every aspect. We have reached out to the neighboring countries. We have reached out to the Gulf states, the Arab countries. We have reached out to Europe, to the US, to even Asia. One way of doing that is by increasing our economic relations and trade between the two sides. But the trade, in our view, is not going to help us very much if it's just one way, importing from other countries. What I am interested in this cabinet is to increase the production of Kurdistan so that we could, in fact, have a balanced trade between Kurdistan and outside. So one of my major tasks in my visits abroad was to find a market for the local products. And for that, we have to increase the opportunities and increase the local production in Kurdistan so that when we have more than we can consume, then we can export it outside. Of course, the best and the most ideal way would be to send most of these products to other parts of Iraq. And for that, we've had numerous talks with relevant ministries to strengthen that bond between Kurdistan and the rest of the federal Iraq. But if we, let's say, have even more, then obviously we have been looking at other markets. And in fact, there have been some successes in exporting some of the products outside as pilot projects. And we hope that by increasing our products, we can in fact help that sector as well, which can generate more revenues for this country.
A viable export market requires buyers, it requires trade routes, and it requires connectivity as well. Have you had any success in establishing more flight routes in and out of Erbil or with the immediate neighborhood in working towards any bilateral trade arrangements outside of Baghdad?
Yeah, what kind of, you mean flights, direct flights?
I mean, trade requires connectivity to start with. Well, let's start with flight routes and also any agreements in the offering in the Gulf or elsewhere.
Well, we have succeeded in securing some agreements with some countries to increase trade between the two sides. On the other hand, as a supporting factor for that, we have encouraged many of these countries to come and invest in Kurdistan, so that with their investments we could have joint benefits, and with increasing more production here with either joint ventures or direct investments, so that we can increase these productions, so that again we can export it to other countries. We have a very attractive investment law that we have amended some of those laws, in fact, to make them more attractive. And we are working on that sector. So we are trying to do our best to increase and to bring more foreign investments in Kurdistan.
Speaking of the region, during the last Baghdad government, there was a serious attempt to reintegrate Iraq with the Arab world in the post-ISIS era, the post-Saddam era, the post-Civil War. How important was that? And also, concurrently, there was an attempt in the last 7 to 8 months to turn Iraq into a broker between Iran and Saudi Arabia in fixing what many would say is an ancient schism, what others would say is a more politically driven schism of modern history. But Iraq hosted a series of talks between both rivals, and how important is that as well?
The short answer is it's important. We are supportive. We do believe that Iraq needs to get back to its original place of being an active player in the region and in the world. So having more engagements with different countries in the region or beyond is going to help Iraq. We in Kurdistan region are a part of this collective security and stability. So the more Iraq moves towards security and stability, I mean, we also benefit from it. So we do support that, and we think it's important.
I mean, in Baghdad, things are rarely stable politically, but last week we saw a real political assassination attempt at the Prime Minister, Mustafa Kadhimi. What did that represent, and who was behind that?
I think we have to wait for the final results that can be officially announced, who is behind it. But it was a cowardly act. We condemned it at the very beginning. We expressed our support to the Prime Minister to promote democracy and stability in the country. So whoever did that did not think of any sort of, let's say, solution for this country. That was an act of creating more chaos, more problems. And I don't think that anybody who is a friend of Iraq or cares for Iraq would be involved in such acts.
Moving now to another neighbour, Turkey, a powerful friend to have and a difficult friend to have at times. I want to focus on the northeast of Syria. There's been some belligerent rhetoric out of Ankara in recent weeks suggesting that another incursion may be planned. What would happen, what would be the impact if that was to happen? And beyond that, is the peace process with the Kurds flatlining?
Well, we are talking about Syria and Turkey now. We don't support any sort of military buildup or any sort of additional incursion or invasions in any part of this region. But there has to be ways to engage and reach a peaceful solution between all the actors and all these tensions that exist, not only between Syria and Turkey or that part of Syria and Turkey, but also in the region as a whole. So we do support very concrete and constructive dialogues between all the sides. Ignoring problems will never bring peace and solutions. Problems have to be addressed and accepted as problems. Then there would be opportunities to look for solutions and ways to get out of it. But ignoring problems will continue to be problematic. So as for the Kurdish talks with Turkey, we've had a number of discussions with the Turkish officials. They've always told us that they don't have problems with the Kurds. They have problems with PKK. So they simply make a distinction between PKK and the Kurds. They're saying that they're willing to address the Kurdish issues and solve many of the outstanding issues, but they are not willing to do that with PKK. So to get back to Syria, I think one way to help the situation would be to break away from PKK. For the administration in northern Syria, in Rojava, in Kurdistan of Syria, must break away from PKK to lessen the sensitivities that the Turks have towards PKK. And in fact, that is going to also help the other Kurds, because as you know, not everybody in Syria is affiliated with PKK, not all of the Kurds. In fact, a minority of them are affiliated with them, but the majority are not, including the 200,000 refugees that now are in Kurdistan. They're not going back because they don't accept this sort of ideology. The best way for them would be to start a Kurdish dialogue, to reach an agreement and to break away from PKK. And that would definitely, I believe, reduce the sensitivities and the tensions with the Turks as well.
You think that is viable in Rojava for the administration itself to break away from the PKK, which has played such a significant role, not just during the fight against ISIS, but beyond that, in building capacity in the northeast?
Why is it not?
Some may argue, and many do, that it's a distinction without a difference to say that the administration itself is separate from the PKK.
So here's the irony. I mean, if they don't want to break away from PKK or believe that there is no way to do that, then of course they will be facing the consequences that unfortunately not many can help. But if they won't help, if they won't help, then they must accept to break away from PKK and start a better future.
Just getting back local now, the reforms that you've put in place, is it fair to say that you're almost staking your legacy on those reforms taking root, that we are at such a critical juncture in the modern history of the KRG that these simply have to work. What happens if they don't?
Well, we don't have that option. It must work, and it will work.
Why are you so confident?
I'm confident because I believe in the abilities of our people. I believe in what we have done, and we have the vision, we have the people, we have the resources. So failure is not an option.
Do you believe you have the buy-in from the society?
Could you elaborate that?
Do you believe the society are invested in what you're trying to achieve?
I think, well, we complement each other. So I'm not saying, you know, what we do or what they do. We collectively have to do it together. And I do believe that we need, of course, to increase communication with each other. We need to build trust more between the government and the people. And once we reach that point, I think success is inevitable.
Just getting back to the relationship with Baghdad, which remains fraught and is likely to remain fraught for many of the issues that we've discussed, what sort of model, ideally, would you have for governance in the KRG? I've heard you in the past talk about confederation. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you would still endorse? And if so, could you explain exactly what that model would represent?
Well, let me just give you maybe a broader explanation of this. If you look at the history of Iraq, and we heard some people speak about this morning in the two panels that they had, talking about the history of Iraq. Iraq was never at peace, ultimate peace. Either it was at war with some people or with its neighbors. That was the reason that a country like Iraq, that is so rich in resources, natural resources, so rich in humans, why Iraq is where it is today. There is only one answer to that. Because the systems in Iraq were not supportive of all these opportunities that exist in Iraq. It was bad systems, bad governance, bad administrations, bad managements. And continuously that's been the case in Iraq. So, and there are reasons why. Because there are some deep-rooted problems in Iraq that often politicians try to ignore. Everybody wants to have a good speech. Everybody wants to look good. But to look good means that you have to ignore the real problems. Because once you touch the real problem, then you can be accused of being a separatist or of being an anti-system. That is the main problem in this country, in my view. There are serious issues, but there are solutions. But like I said just a little while ago, the first step towards solving problems is admitting to the problem, admitting that there are some serious problems. If you look at the differences of communities, look at the national identity in Iraq. How many are Iraqis before they are something else? There are Shia Iraqis, there are Sunni Iraqis, there are Kurdish Iraqis. But are there Iraqis that are no Shias and no Sunnis and no Kurds?
Well, I'm glad you raised national identity because Syed Amar Hakim spoke persuasively about this morning, talking about the need for a cohesive national identity. Let me ask you, as the Prime Minister of the KRG, are you a Kurd first or an Iraqi first?
I am a Kurd. I didn't finish. Please. I didn't finish. I didn't finish. The reason... Look, when we're talking about systems, it doesn't mean that we cannot live together. Of course, I'm a Kurd. Iraq is an identity, is borders on a map, and that's supposed to be a country, and it's a fabricated state, whether we like it or not.
it was drawn to be a country. It was not based on the differences of nationalism or geography. It was a fabricated state that was built about almost 100 years ago. Now we live in Iraq. Yes, I am officially an Iraqi, but of course, I am a Kurd that was forced to live in Iraq. So, please. But what does that mean? That means that we can still live together. We can use the examples of European Union. The Europeans have fought for hundreds of years to create their own states. And then they realized that they can create a European Union, lifting borders, live together. There was, if there is an engineer in Germany or an engineer in France, could have more in common than a physician and an engineer in the same country. That mentality must also be accepted in the Middle East, especially in the areas that the Kurds live. Now, we have a country, we have a land, we have a territory that's called Kurdistan, and it's divided in history at least twice. But how can we live together with the rest of Arabs and Turks and Persians? We are living in this region. Nobody of us is going anywhere. So what would be the system that we can be helpful to each other, complement each other, rather than seeing as threats to each other? That, once again, brings me back to what I said. It's the system. The system has to be changed so that we could all feel comfortable and all of our needs can be accommodated. We don't have to follow the steps of Europeans, to go into war, to create borders, and then to lift borders. We could just jump into the final step and lift the borders and all live together. But that mentality cannot be enforced if only Kurds feel that way. The Arabs have to feel that way. Turks have to feel that way. Iranians have to feel that way. But if they insist that it's my right to have my own identity, to have my own territories, my own independence, and then deny you the same right that they take it for granted for them, of course, that's not fair, it's not just, and it will not bring sustainable solutions and peace to the region. These are some of the issues that we have to address and be brave enough to address it. Many people try to avoid these questions because it's not politically correct. But that is the problem. We don't have to be politically correct. We have to be correct. We have to do the things right. And that is to look at the system that is acceptable. Let's say if you're talking about Iraq, it has to be acceptable by the Shia communities. It has to be acceptable by the Sunnis. It has to be acceptable by the Kurds. Do we have anything in common? Absolutely. There is a lot that we have in common. So let's look, instead of looking at the differences, let's look at the commonalities that we all share. And let's build on that and give each other guarantees that the atrocities of the past will never be repeated. We are victims of our past. And everybody is afraid of what could happen in the future if there are no guarantees that one community or one society or one group, one regime cannot abuse the power that they possess against the other. That can only be done by a system, not just by ink on the paper. We have had the Constitution. The Constitution could not prevent the abuse of power by a prime minister to use force against Kurdistan. Who held the prime minister accountable? No one, because the mechanism couldn't stop that. We need a mechanism that can stop that. So we started, we tried monarchy. We tried or lived through dictatorship. We lived through autonomy. We lived through federalism. If none of that worked, why can't we try something else?
We definitely can try something else, and that something else could be unique to Iraq. It doesn't have to be a system that we can duplicate from somewhere else. It can be something unique to us.
Confederation?
It could be confederation. It could be confederation. We could talk to each other. We could accept, but that has to be on the basis of understanding and accepting each other.
Throughout the fight against the ISIS terror group, the US remained a bedrock ally. But over the last year, or perhaps a bit longer, I've sensed in some of our conversations, but also some of your public statements, that your satisfaction with Washington has started to dip. Do you see Washington under this administration as a bedrock ally? And are you looking elsewhere for countries to strategically partner with? I'm talking here not just about the neighborhood, but what say you to the rise of China and its interest in the KRG?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the United States. They are very smart people, and they can decide what's best for their country. But as allies, as friends that we have been through so much, we appreciate the support that they have given to us since toppling Saddam's regime, and then helping us during the war against ISIS. So we appreciate the support that both the US and the coalition and all of our friends have given to us. So leave that aside. But in terms of the US policy in the region, of course we have our own way of analyzing things. I must say that the situation in Iraq is not the creation of the Iraqis itself. So it's not the Iraqis themselves that have created the situation. There was a lot of external influences that shaped the events and today's Iraq. So today to say that, okay, well, we take our hands off and leave it to you. After what? Iraq still needs help. And that help must come from Iraq's friends. Those friends could be anyone. But we do believe that America is a friend. This engagement of the United States in this region can change the balance. We think that America needs to still stay engaged until Iraqis are strong enough to make up their own mind and make their own decisions.
Does the United States...
Any gap left by the Americans will be filled by non-Iraqis. It's not going to be filled by the Iraqis.
Does the United States remain a friend you can depend on?
Why don't you ask them? I hope that. I can say
your
one
lived
thing.
experience,
I can say
sir.
one thing. I can say that we are the friends that all of our friends can depend on and can count on us. So I hope that that could be true with them as well. But definitely, we think Americans are friends. Now you mentioned something that I would like to elaborate on. You mentioned China and other powers. And I heard the panelist earlier talking about American shift of focus and competing with China at maybe a different level. Of course, that's an American decision. They know what their priorities are. What would be the best for the United States? That's their decision. But some of the decisions they make can unfortunately affect us because, like I said, they have been actors. So they can't, any disengagement has to be gradual and has to guarantee some sort of stability before they disengage. That's important. Now with the and this is not my job to tell the Americans what to do, but there are some facts. If America, let's say, disengages and wants to just focus on competing with China on technology, but disengaging from the region, what does that mean? That region can become an area of maneuver for America's competitors. So the question is that what the Americans want? If that's what their policy is, then I have nothing to say. But if they still want to be influential, they cannot just take their hands off someplace and focus on some other area, thinking that that will bring them more success. So I do believe that there are parallel policies that need to be followed. We think that, you know, as friends, all of our friends can stay with us, but the rules of engagement can change. Those rules can be the rules of support, can be the rules of construction, providing economic aid, consulting, and training, and also help in terms of capacity building. There could be many, many different ways of helping Iraq.
We spoke earlier about what I would characterize as existential political issues vis-a-vis your accommodations or lack thereof with Baghdad, and perhaps a lack of buy-in to a system which is essential to hold this country together. But I wanted to talk about other existential issues, and they are natural issues. Climate change. We've just seen the end of a summit in which small states and large states were supposed to combine and share interests and work towards climate goals. I think the outcomes there were equivocal. But in your neighbourhood, you're dealing with significant desertification, as President Barham Saleh said this morning, and also water scarcity, which we're coming off the worst drought in 100 years in eastern Syria, and I imagine the situation is very similar here. What can you possibly do to secure essential water supplies, especially given that two of your rivers, or one of them I should say, runs through Turkey and Syria itself?
There are things that we can do, and there are things that only God can do. We cannot make rain fall on us if the God doesn't want it. So that's different. But with the scarcity of water, and with droughts and no dry seasons like we've had last year and this year, this is going to pose significant environmental challenges to Iraq and the region as a whole. And this climate change is global. It's not just in Iraq. It's global. So we all are collectively facing this. And I think if I could just make a general remark, if we don't respect the earth, if we don't respect the environment and the earth is going to retaliate against us. So we need to be respectful of the environment we live in. Now, to get back to some more specific questions you mentioned, of course, because of understanding the danger of, let's say, water supplies and issues, unfortunately, there are international laws that deals with this. But if we look at the sources of water that come into Iraq, there are two major rivers that enter Iraq from Turkey, one directly, which is Tigris, and then the other one is Euphrates that comes through Syria and then enters Iraq. Any sort of blockage of this water or the flow of this water is going to negatively affect the situation in Iraq. And I think this is, again, a collective responsibility. Nobody should think that if I secure my situation,
and in this case it's food security, then I don't care about what happens to my neighbor, because that neighbor can pose different threats to the security of the country of the source. Because there would be more migrations, there could be more, a bad economy could lead and give birth to more extremism and terrorism. So we are in this together. We can't just think about our own security as an isolated entity. We have to look at collective security in the region. And this is important. Now, the waters, for instance, that feed both lakes of Dukan and Darbandi Khan have been diverted. But if these lakes dry out, if the economic situation in this region falls apart, then what happens? These people have to, it's human nature. They look for ways to survive. And those ways could not necessarily be helpful to the neighboring countries. So the best way to help Iraq, the best way to help these people would be to help improve the living conditions in this country so that we can basically become of better use. Now, what we have done, in this cabinet, we anticipated this problem. We've decided to build 23 dams. Some of them are small, some medium, and some of them are relatively large size. The small ones and the medium size are under construction, and the larger ones, we need funds. So one way to deal with this water issues is to help us finance these dams that can actually help survive and save people here. It's not just in Kurdistan, but it's in the rest of the country. We think that by holding water reservoirs and holding water and creating these dams, it not can only help people survive, but it also can contribute to the climate change, to let's say agriculture. It can help industry. It can help tourism. So in many ways, it can be beneficiary. And this is our policy. And I hope that at the beginning, we may need some hand of support. But at the end, I'm sure that this will pay off, not only for us, but for everybody that engages with us.
Kak Masrour, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've given us the granular detail at local level and the panoramic take as well on the region. We could talk a lot more, and I'd be very happy to, but I'm told by the organisers that our time's up. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please thank His Excellency, the Prime Minister Masrour Barzani.